Thank you, sir. As an amendment to Deputy Cole's main proposition, I intend to keep this brief. Firstly, I want to reiterate that this proposition to which this amendment amends is only an in-principle one. The Assembly would not be changing law or policy today, and if Part B were to be adopted, the Government would undertake several elements of policy work to bring back to the Assembly. As amended by the Council of Ministers, this would include bringing forward possible proposals on personal cultivation. So why, members might ask, have I retained my amendment? Well, for one, discussing with Deputy Coles, we both want to see these as debates, where people can inform and engage and understand members' perspectives. This should not be just a chance to reiterate views. We should be learning. And retaining this as a standalone debate allows us to discuss what cultivation means and what decriminalisation without it would look like. Secondly, I believe it is important that should the Assembly adopt Part A, that the principle of personal cultivation should be allowed within that decision. Perhaps it's best to look at where we stand today, and Deputy Coles has touched on this. Some States members and members of the public would argue cannabis is somewhat decriminalised already. The Attorney General's guidance permits the use of written cautions for small amounts of the possession of cannabis. The rise in medicinal prescribing has allowed, I believe, about 6% of the working population to access high THC content cannabis legally, so long as they pay their prescription, doctor's appointment fees, and prove their medical requirement. Decriminalising possession and consumption would not be a significant step away from that landscape, and would perhaps allow us to prescribe different amounts and apply better controls over where we may apply criminal penalties should breaches occur. What would remain the case, however, is that it would be a criminal act in any case to procure or supply cannabis, even when the possession of said cannabis is decriminalised. So one argument one may think is we should look to legalise, and we've heard that some jurisdictions are moving towards that. We could look to licence a supply, tax a product, and whilst these are relevant conversations to have, and likely work that will take part under Part B following the Council of Ministers amendment, there are many good reasons that is not the step to take now. One could consider you could decriminalise the act of small dealing and importing, but I, for one, have no interest in supporting illegal dealing and importing and the impact that crime activities have on our community. How else then, if the Assembly agrees to decriminalise the personal possession and consumption, do we square this circle? To me, and many other jurisdictions that have decriminalised, the answer is personal cultivation. This would enable islanders to produce their own supply, be assured of the quality and provenance of what they produce, and feel safe in the knowledge they are not enabling crime and the impact on society that it has. How does this work in practice? Well, should the Assembly agree to the principles today, officers will be working on the best solutions for Jersey for members to debate. However, we can look at other jurisdictions and the policies they have and the reasons behind them. I hope members will have noted the specific examples given in my report. If they have, they will have seen the common thread that is between these. Firstly, jurisdictions apply a limit on the number of plants that can be grown. This is more practical to work than the gram allowance, as a plant will produce differently under different scenarios. This allowance can be per person or per household, and that can be debated by the states later. Jurisdictions often apply a total dried plant matter to be allowed to be kept at home on private premises once harvested. This is no different to the allowed plant matter that one would be permitted to keep under decriminalisation of possession. Thirdly, limits are typically applied on where the plant can be grown, on private property and mostly prescribed as out of public view. Jersey would not need to be limited to these controls, and we could find and adopt our own policy that best suits the island. And members can likely picture a combination of these would enable a proportionate policy, both enforceable and manageable. Like we've heard, members must always consider risks. And there are always going to be risks, and these may include, when we discuss personal cultivation, the quality of produce, of all things. Home growers are likely to be less consistent with their growing techniques than the pure professionals and what we see in medicinal cannabis. This could mean plant spoilage and could mean mould that, if then consumed, could have a health impact. But on the other side, imported illegal cannabis is also likely to be of mixed quality. Only the medically grown cannabis supplied to that 6% of working population is assured to a THC value and to a quality. And I don't think we want to be encouraging the proliferation, if it does indeed occur, of medical grade and, in essence, a prescribed material being used outside of a prescription. We want our clinical standards and reputation to be better than that. And on the note of quality, I have been informed that home growers are likely to produce a lower potency cannabis than that grown in optimum growing conditions, which would make it a less strong product, akin to drinking a lower ABV product. Another risk would be smells and nuisances, that neighbours would be impacted by the smell of growing plants. We already have a statutory nuisances law that deals with odour, and by having a plant limit and location restrictions on where a plant can be grown, I see no reason this can't be handled within the details to avoid any neighbour impact. Indeed, I would suggest that those who illicitly grow it around the world at the moment do their best to hide the proof that it can even be detected by their neighbours. The last one may be the contamination using materials and airborne seeds to the medicinal cannabis industry. But those of us who have been lucky to visit those facilities will know how wonderful those facilities are and how tight a ship they run. Well, those are the risks. We should consider the opportunities. We should look at both sides of this. And I will start with one, which is education. In many areas of our life where we are consumers, we are growing to say we need to be educated consumers. Our food systems are things we need to tackle obesity, to tackle our consumption of drink, of alcohol or tobacco. We need to be better educated on the impacts and effects, and ultimately the provenance and location of anything we consume. And so I think those who are tighter connected to anything they consume can only be good for education. The second one, I don't want to make light of this one, is if, in the main debate, the Estates Assembly agree with the principle of decriminalisation of possession and consumption, then we should be thinking, for those people, about the cost incurred of anything. We debate every year duty rises on alcohol and the impact someone has to enjoy their leisurely pastime. And for somebody to have the opportunity to be afforded the chance to grow their own product is, in essence, enabling access and inclusion. And I really don't want to understate that one. We debate this all the time, the cost of living. It is something the government's aimed to address. Should we adopt the principles, then I think it applies here as well. And then I want to look at the last one, which is satisfaction and enjoyment. People have hobbies and get a lot of enjoyment out of hobbies which grant them responsibility, interest, skill and profession. The island's got a great history of horticulturalists. We're not normally horticulturalists in the sense of cannabis, but we know how much satisfaction there can be from gardening, from growing, from brewing, from baking. And again, I think it should be entirely recognised that part of people's lives is taking responsibility over things, and most of us know that horticulture is a great place. You water your plant every day, you look after its condition. And where we have a society, perhaps, where responsibility and the chances to take self-sovereignty about things you do yourself are becoming more limited, for our mental health, people should be offered those rights. So lastly, I want to address what decriminalisation would look like without cultivation. And it would be, in short, that islanders could be sentenced in the Royal Court for growing, for being a producer of cannabis, despite the fact that once harvested, that level of cannabis would be decriminalised to both possess and consume. So really, no matter how cannabis arrives at a consumer, it must be grown. So should the state support decriminalisation, allow consumers to grow their own.